Welcome back for another week of Political Breakfast. We are always glad to have you here listening on WAVE. With me today are strategists Brian Robinson and Tharon Johnson. Opening statements began for the former president in his hush money trial in New York, and all eyes are on this particular trial, especially people here in Georgia watching it to see if it'll set a precedent here. What are your thoughts on this opening day going into this? Tharon, I'll begin with you.
I just want our listeners to really just close their eyes and just think about where we are right now in American politics. We have a former president of the United States of America who is running to try to be reelected or be president again of the United States of America, who is on trial with some very, very, I think, damning information about his activities, which, by the way, Lisa, stems all the way back into 2015. I mean, and it was funny. I was at the Swan Ball this weekend in Atlanta, and the Atlanta History Center. They do a really, really good job raising a lot of money. And just, you know, what Brian knows is I like to go talk to my favorite demographic, you know, these women, disaffected Republicans, college educated, and just to kind of get their sense on where they thought things were and how they felt about, you know, this trial. And what was very interesting to me, it was very synonymous amongst the women and some of the men that I talked to, was that it was just embarrassing that this is coming up. And I know that the former president believes that he's being targeted and this is just so bad. But what the prosecution has got to be able to do is figure out a way to not only talk about his alleged affair with and this is what the women said to me, a porn star, but also how did the hush money really impact him being able to enter to race. And then just remember that year, 2015, you know, Trump emerged on the scenes in 15, and his people had to know that this affair that he had with this porn star was going to come up. And so testifying today are people from magazines and people who were apparently in the room when all these conversations were happening. And then last thing I want to say this real quick, you know, Stephen A. Smith, you know, you guys always ask me, who do I listen to? You know, I'm a huge fan of First Take and my boy, you know, Shannon Sharp. But, you know, Stephen A. Smith kind of doubled down a little bit on Donald Trump, saying because he's got on these indictments and he has to go to trial and, you know, he's being targeted, he can relate to black people. I thought the NAACP had the best response. I just want to read it really quickly. So they said, relatable. They said, by the way, show of hands, anyone in your black family has 88 felony charges pending, filed bankruptcy 6 times, and made an attempt to overthrow a presidential election in our democracy, and still have the ability to fall asleep in court and dream of being the president of the United States of America. I just want to crystallize that for all of my brothers and sisters out there, that Stephen A. Smith, I like him. He was wrong on that. But to me, reading that national statement from the NAACP shows you how people need to wake up and stop giving this man privilege and thinking that he's somehow the victim, when these are very, very serious charges that are being deliberated in a juror's hearing to open the statements this week in New York.
What do you think, Brian? Is he still being handed out privilege right before the eyes of America?
Well, first of all, let me say that the statement that Tharon just read is exactly why Republicans should never go speak to the NAACP under the auspices of this is a civil rights organization. It is a Democratic affiliated group that is targeting Republicans, and that really sums it up. But it is a crazy time, you know, but I do think that Americans are somewhat bored with all of this. I mean, could you imagine that? We're talking about a former president and a porn star. I mean, all the elements of great narrative and titillating details that are involved, but we're bored. How bored are we? What were we hearing about last week about him potentially or allegedly falling asleep, which is referenced in that NAACP thing, and whether or not he was passing gas at the witness table? That was literally part of the story.
That's true. That's true.
That was out there. Yeah, so that's where we are now. That the news of the day, which is significant to the country, is so boring to Americans that we're having to talk about flatulence and naps, which is a topic for a different podcast, perhaps. I don't think any of this matters. This trial is one that even Democrats say is kind of dumb. That there is obviously a reason beyond politics why someone would want to keep an affair quiet. And I think when you have those situations where if there is a plausible other explanation, that a prosecutor should be deferential in that case. To say that this was a campaign finance violation is utterly ridiculous. And I will say, Democrats are going to pay a price for this one. It's not going to be Trump who pays a price for this, unless he has a bad visual like falling asleep a lot. That could hurt him, because that's going to cut across his narrative that Biden's too old, but Trump is fit and energetic. So he's got to be careful to avoid that visual sitting there in those long, boring court hearings. But Democrats are going to be hurt by this, because Americans think this trial is dumb, and it makes the other cases, some of which have merit, seem more political than perhaps they even are.
So what does this do for the case here in Georgia, the RICO prosecution?
Well, the RICO prosecution, to me, gets a sort of a needed breath of fresh air, meaning like now everyone is turning to New York. So now District Attorney Fani Willis, the newly appointed special prosecutors, the judges, everyone has an opportunity to kind of reset, and you get back to the merits of the case. And now you've heard the district attorney say that it's sort of, trains are still rolling full steam ahead. Now, look, B. Rob makes a good point about what Democrats have got to do. And I just wanted to bring a level of sort of laughter to this. But no, it's not a laughing matter. But, one of the things that we get complimented about, Lisa, and people really compliment you, allowing me and B. Rob to kind of go at it sometimes with our bantering, is to really honestly crystallize what he just said. I mean, this is kind of where American politics is on the presidential level. What I think Democrats got to be doing is, like you said, Lisa, making sure that we remind people that this former president have some very serious charges against him that are, again, you're innocent until proven guilty, almost 90 indictments. And so what I'm trying to really just articulate, and Democrats need to do this, is that this has just been a pattern of behavior from this former president since 2015. So there's only a brief time that no matter what happens, and Brian and I can definitely argue whether or not the charges are serious, and I do believe they're serious. I do believe that it's going to be really left up to the witness testimonies. You're going to have people who are former Trump lawyers, former Trump allies testify against this man in court. So I think depending on how that goes, if it's not too much of a circus and Fulton County can take a breath of fresh air, I do believe that they now got to come out with an update. Where are we in the case? Who's the next co-defendant up? What have you been able to do, District Attorney Fani Willis, since Nathan Wade is no longer on the prosecution team? You got to make sure you continue to articulate that to the public. Because while people are not necessarily paying attention to it day to day anymore, you need to get ahead of the Trump team, because as soon as New York is over, they're going to turn their attention back to Georgia.
That's true. And so what's part of how it impacts this Atlanta case, this Fulton County case, Lisa, is because this week the attention has got to be on the New York case, and however long that goes on. That's going to crowd out any news that may develop in Fani Willis's case against Trump. And frankly, if there's any news that comes out about the RICO case in Fulton County, it's probably going to help Donald Trump in the grand scheme of things from the macro level, because it just becomes noise. Even if you're a well-informed voter who follows some of this, it's hard to kind of keep track of the different cases. If you are passively listening to news, you don't necessarily even know what case they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And another way, and this is an indirect way that it may impact the Fulton County case, is that Donald Trump may be found not guilty in this trial, because even though it is probably a partisan New York Democratic-leaning jury, I have no doubt that it is, they're going to be like, paying off a porn star you had an affair with is a campaign finance violation? I don't want to live in a world where that's true, right? Everyone has a God-given right to pay off the porn stars that they sleep with, and this is utterly absurd. And so that is going to be how this potentially plays out here, that he's going to get off, and that may give him momentum. It may give him a reason to go out there and celebrate a little bit and say, look, the American people are speaking out. They're pushing back on this lawfare, this persecution through prosecution.
Yeah, speaking of momentum, Tharon, how do you think this is factoring into his presidential campaign today as we speak?
B. Rob and I, we were down outside of Mobile, Alabama. I don't even remember the city.
Point Clear, or is that
Point
right?
Point Clear, Alabama. And Lisa, again, people listen to this podcast, and it was interesting. Shout out to the Georgia Association of Manufacturers.
Point Clear. Yeah, hello.
Yeah,
Point
Point Clear. Well, I won't say about experience in Point Clear trying to get out of there at 6 o'clock in the morning. B Rob had to hear about my no. There's apparently, Lisa, we learn something about you every week. You know about Point Clear, Alabama. Well, guess what? Point Clear, Alabama don't have any Ubers that run before 8 a.m. in the morning. So B Rob got out of there the night before. Smart guy. He noticed this around us. I think I maybe saw 3 other black people for the entire time I was there, but I had to get on a 6 a.m. flight. But anyway, let me get back to what we're talking about. But shout out to this great organization who brought Brian and I down there in a great conversation. So I led, Lisa, with the same thing I just led with this podcast. Guys, just, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, 85% white men, maybe 80%. And I said, 2 things. One, I am so enthusiastic about this conversation because if we had had this conversation that we're having now and 2 months ago, my guy was down in the polls pretty significantly, not only in Georgia, but around the country in battleground states. Now, Lisa, we're seeing the polls are tightening. The lead is shrinking. And there's some states that Biden is actually winning in these battleground states. And so how is it affecting the race for President Joe Biden? It's benefiting him because now we see the race tightening. Nikki Haley is gone. She's taking a new job. I saw Tim Scott at the Masters. It took everything in me not to call him a sellout in front of him. But we were in the store together, and we were shopping, and he was buying a hat, and I was buying a hat. But he got that look, Lisa. Black men, we give other black men that look. And it wasn't we know.
How did that conversation go? How did that conversation go?
I was going to say something to him. And you know what I said? I said, I respect the office of the U.S. Senate. But I gave him that look, and I shook my head. And he knows that look. Black men know that look. I'm sure I'm sure white men got that look too, right? But it was a shameful look. How dare? And I was like, as my grandmother would say, I'm just so ashamed of you. I'm just so disappointed in you. So I gave him that look. And we didn't converse, and I'm sure he doesn't know who I am, but we went from there. So no, the race is tightening. The former president's on trial. And it's a 2-way race, maybe 3-way race if we get a third candidate. So I think the Biden team has got to listen to what B. Rob just said. Donald Trump may actually get off. I mean, let me just go ahead and say this. And you better, keep doubling down on the commercials, on the focus groups, talking to the American people about this economy, talking to them about what you're doing around healthcare, talking about the Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, how you work in a bipartisan manner to get things done. Governing was at its best last weekend. So we got to continue to keep the pressure on because once the theater is over in New York, we're going to have to remind people why this president should be reelected.
So I don't know, Brian. Is it bad politics for both Democrats and Republicans, Brian? This trial?
I don't want to be too repetitious over what I said last week, but I do think Democrats have to some degree jumped the shark on all of these cases against Donald Trump. Just as I was saying last week that, the prosecution of Burt Jones probably helps Burt Jones more than hurts him because people can look at the facts of the case and be like, I don't really see how this is worth millions of dollars of taxpayers paying to investigate this. We know what the facts are. I don't see this as being all that serious. And the fact that they've gone after little things that are gray areas, it makes Trump's argument that this is lawfare, that this is persecution, all the stronger. So I do think there's going to be a bit of a wash. And when it comes to some of the more substantive charges against him, such as those being brought forward by Jack Smith, we don't really know what the timeline is going to be on that right now. If that all begins to pop in the fall, it's going to look heavily political to the electorate, and that's going to impact how they view it. When I talk to people who are in the Republican base, they think all of this is nonsense. All of this is persecution. And so the question is, who in that middle section, the flippers who went from Trump to Biden or from Hillary Clinton to Trump, the people who voted for Raphael Warnock and then voted for Brian Kemp as well, how do they view that? And that's what I think is of note. And how much are they going to dig in on this when it has become noise? Are they going to have a look at the nuances of these different cases? Or are they going to decide he's a criminal or he's a persecuted victim? Are they just going to lump it all together and make one big decision or the other? I think that could play a role in how they vote. But as I said to the manufacturers last week, I honestly believe that this election doesn't come down to these trials. It comes down to the economy. I think the Republicans have some weaknesses on the abortion issue, like we're seeing in Arizona. The Democrats have weaknesses on persistent and nagging inflation and on the border. And Republicans obviously have a divide on the Ukraine issue. So those are some of the issues that the parties are facing. But if Biden can say the economy is on good footing and Americans feel it, I think he's going to be in good shape. If Americans feel like they aren't as well off as they were under Trump, and let's say pre-COVID in 2019, I think Biden's going to be in a lot of trouble. Right now, and I think Tharon would agree with this because I think it's pretty safe to say, if the election were held this Tuesday, Trump would win, right?
Nah.
No, the polls are narrowing. They're narrowing. But right now, he's maintaining leads in those deciding states.
I believe the American people will not vote for a man. If the election was this Tuesday, he's on trial. First of all, will he even be able to go vote for himself? He would have to do absentee ballot. But then he's trashed the U.S. Postal Service, B-Rob. So the absentee ballot wouldn't even make it there in time. So I disagree with you.
He can use the drop box. He can drop box it.
Y'all got rid of drop boxes. New York, all them. So how will he vote?
That's fake news. That's fake news.
No, you guys would definitely get rid of them here in Georgia because you say we don't need them anymore. But no, real quick, Lisa, listen.
No, they're just inside. They're just inside a monitor. That's all.
That's what you reduce the. No, he would not win. He couldn't even vote for himself. He couldn't even participate in the debate. He's on trial. He's literally in a courtroom. Maybe asleep, maybe passing gas, maybe, right now. I mean, that's just like, so no, I truly believe the one thing that Donald Trump has on his side is time. And you've been saying this, B-Rob, like it's April. He's on trial now, but we have a long way to go in this election. But last thing I say, and at least I think you may be going to take us here, one thing I would add to B-Rob's sort of warning to Republicans is that you also have a divide in your party right now when you have Marjorie Taylor Greene who's trying to oust your Republican speaker. I mean, like, to me, you weren't talking about division. Democrats, we have our own issues. But I think we're becoming more and more united around reelecting this president, where you have so much infighting in the Republican Party right now, where Trump is just the least of your problems. You gotta figure out how you're gonna keep your party together in the House, in the U.S. House right now.
Brian Robinson is our Republican strategist. Tharon Johnson is our Democratic strategist. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, this week. And you too, our valued listener, thanks for listening to us on WAVE.org.